Because, I was also telling you the other day how I looked in a little more carefully to Tony Hancock and, like, why did Sid James go off to do all these Carry On films and Tony Hancock's nowhere to be seen and then committed suicide, like 8 years later. And, it was just, like, real severe alcoholism. Like, as you read through his biography, it's like, okay, he had a falling out with Sid James, stopped working with him. He had a falling out with this team of writers, and was never as popular without these people surrounding him. Like, he had his dream team, and he kept pushing people away. And by the end, apparently he had just such bad, like, cirrhosis of the liver or whatever it's called, that doctors were saying, like, if you don't quit drinking, you're going to be dead within like 3 months or something. It was that close. And at that point, he was like, well, I'm not going to be able to quit. Are you kidding? And he killed himself. So pretty bleak, pretty sad. But along with that whole bleak tale of, like, okay, so Tony went this way, the two writer guys went this way, Sid James went over to the Carry On films, and since I like to just kind of keep the show a little loose of, like, whatever happened last week, let's move on to next week, and let's just sort of amble around, and generally it sort of works out. So I was like, last week we really did talk about the Carry On films a lot, and I've always heard about them, and I've never seen them. And we've never watched a whole movie. That's a lot longer. We usually just watch shows on this podcast, like a little half hour, maybe an hour-long show. But if you're in for the whole run, why don't we watch a Carry On movie? Because I want to see one.
Sure. I haven't seen one for years, so sure.
So since this is so long, it's a whole hour and a half, I figure we could split it in half. We'll watch the first 40 minutes, 45. Well, we'll see how deep we get, and then take a break, go get something to eat. And, we'll do our intermission thoughts, and then we'll finish it off separate. So it'll be more like watching two shows instead of a whole long movie.
All right, well, get ready for some cornball.
Yeah, so let me tell you what I got to my facts of Carry On, because I did learn. That's one thing I love about all this, is learning about weird random things. So there were 30 Carry On films from 1958 to 1978, and then one revival film in 1992, but that one didn't have a lot of the original cast and no one liked it. So it barely counts, but technically they did one more. And right away, this is where I start getting hit with these weird facts that I didn't know that are interesting. So they said on the wiki page for the Carry On films that the humor is based on the British common tradition of Victorian music halls. So you're like, okay, sure, just different variety show, comedy, probably somewhat bawdy or whatever. But speaking of bawdy, also the tradition of bawdy seaside postcards. Have you ever heard of that shit?
Body seaside postcards.
Yeah, in fact, I guess I'll bring some up because they're...
Okay, well, you always kind of have, when they talk about people going to Brighton, which is on the sea, it's always kind of that there's a lot of, like, shows going on and not real high class. So that's the closest I can come to something like that. And body, we mean B-A-W-D-Y, I presume, right, instead of B-O-D-Y.
Right. So yeah, these things, they really are what it says on the tin, bawdy seaside postcards. They started, in these seaside tourist towns, like, hey, buy some postcards, send them home, souvenir type shit. And then just gradually, as part of the array, it's like, well, why don't we, we're on the beach, we got, ladies in swimsuits and stuff, why don't we make some postcards of, like, oh, here's the one with the lady on the postcard. And those ones were way more popular, and it became this whole thing. This is another one of these things that probably everybody in England of a certain age knows what these things are, but I never heard of them before. They were so famous, particularly this one guy, Donald McGill. His were really famous. He made 12,000 different postcard designs, sold over 200 million cards in small shops in British seaside towns.
Oh, the things people will do for seeing a little bit of skin.
Yeah. And then in the 1950s, a bunch of local councils organized a mass cleanup because they're like, these are too bawdy. These aren't appropriate. And it's actually a little bit of a sad story, his story, because he had this, like, empire going and it just got destroyed by this dumb moral majority nonsense. They kind of remind me of, like, just like the comics that would be in, like, Playboy magazine or something.
Oh, yes, look at her. Her skirt's flipping up a little bit.
Yeah, so I'll just flip through some of them real quick. But it's this type of thing.
Yes, the bikini.
So, yeah, this is just an example of what I'm talking about. But, yeah, and, just dumb jokes like a lady holding, like a busty lady holding two dogs. And, the guy's like, that's quite a pair you have there, madam. There's just that type of shit. But anyway, so this is kind of where the Carry On type of humor came from.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah.
but they're a little racy.
So yeah, an interesting thing to learn about because again, I'm sure
I have
anybody
to go on there and read those ones.
Yeah, the body seaside postcards and yeah, no, and it's just funny too that that's what in the 50s. It's like we can't have these; we have to get rid of them.
But see, that's what I'm saying when people say, "Well, they're going to the seaside,"
right?
And that's what I connect when I'm watching old British shows and they're going to Brighton. Which now has got all kinds of it's like a big resort and it's got the rides and all that stuff.
Like a carnival and that type of
shit.
shit.
But my idea of it when I read a lot of especially stuff from the 50s and 60s and the 30s and the 40s is when people go to Brighton, it's because they're going to see some sex. They're going to have a really good time and have a racy good time. It's not just going off to some quiet little sedate, classy type place. It's kind of like a little lowlife.
Yeah, it seems almost...
love to go because it's, fun.
And isn't it kind of, it's sort of counterintuitive to the North American view where to us it's like when we visited like New York in, I guess that was like the early 90s, was that we drove to Florida and passed through New York?
Passed through New York, yeah.
And, that's the the big seedy town full of porn shops and stuff where it's, like you would kind of think maybe London would be the place where you'd find the body postcards, but no, it's the seaside towns. Very sort of different. It's reverse.
So people wouldn't be running around London in their swimsuits, though.
Yeah, right.
But at the seashore, woo,
yeah.
Anything goes.
Yeah, so that's, that alone, like that's what I like about looking up stuff. Even if all I learn out of this is about those, like, interesting. I didn't know about that. That's cool. And yeah, just that those things too, like that were just... in the 50s, they're like, this is scummy stuff. We got to get rid of it. But now, because of that, they're super valuable. If you have any of the original ones, they're collector's items and like they're neat now. They're recognized as artistically, valid. They have merit, but not back then. It's like, oh my God, how can you make a joke about the
sex? Sex.
How dare you? So with the Carry On films, it's the largest number of films of any British film series. Number 2 is James Bond with 25 films. I'm sure James Bond will catch up, though, because James Bond is still going. But yeah, 30 films would Carry On. That's pretty intense.
Pretty impressive.
And the name comes from just that the very first film was called Carry On, Sergeant, which is just a common military phrase. Carry on, Corporal, carry on, whatever your normal duties are. Don't worry about me walking by, even though I'm your commanding officer. Just carry on. So... it made sense in the first one, and then they just kept, using that same thing, and just, it's sort of like Carry On Nurse, whatever. It's getting a little like you wouldn't say that, but it makes sense. And at this point, we're going to watch Carry On Camping. No one says that. That means nothing. It's just the Carry On movie about camping. Which, speaking of, Carry On Camping, this is from 1969. It's the 17th Carry On film, and the reason I chose this one is I looked up a bunch of different top lists. And this isn't usually the top one, but it's in everybody's top 5. Everyone agrees this is one of the best ones. And it was voted number 1 in, let me see. It was the most popular film at the box office that year. But they did a survey in the Daily Mirror in 2008, and it was voted the nation's favorite Carry On film. So it's in every critic's list somewhere, and it was voted by the people as the best one. So how bad can it be? And the little bit, I just, looked into this a little bit, make sure it works or whatever, and check it out. And that dude, Sid James, from that we saw last week in Hancock's Half Hour, how I think we've commented before how weird it is in sitcoms that you get the, hilarious character making all the wisecracks, but no one ever laughs and no one ever reacts. The little bit I've seen of these clips of these Carry On films, that guy, Sid James... it's weird where people don't necessarily laugh at his jokes, but he laughs at his own jokes. He's so fucking obnoxious. I guess we'll see if he's like that in this one too, but,
Well, he's very much like, when we saw Hancock's Half Hour, he's very much that character in these Carry-Ons, and I suspect that that's him.
Right.
That is the personality of that man, and he's not really playing a part that is foreign to him. But that would make him a great actor. Right. But he plays himself, and he plays himself well, because anything I've ever seen him in, he's that character, and that's why he stands out. As soon as you see him, you say, oh yeah, that's Sid James.
Yeah, I did always think, too, it's a little overrated. Like, it's neat when you get people like Gary Oldman that can just be a chameleon and do whatever. But maybe you are only good at one thing, but if you're really good at it, that's fine. Just do that one thing. So I thought, too, I would just run down the names of the top stars, because so many of these movies had the same people. I don't know any of these names, but I thought I'd just run them by you to see if you know any of them ahead of time. So obviously, Sid James, Kenneth Williams.
Oh, yes, tall, thin guy, and real effeminate.
Okay. Charles Hawtrey.
I can't say that one jumps out at me.
Joan Sims.
Oh, yes, Joan Sims, blonde, heavy set, but kind of always plays this little sexy type.
Terry Scott.
Terry Scott. No, that name doesn't ring.
Hattie Jacques.
Oh, Hattie Jacques.
Hattie Jacques.
Hattie Jacques, big woman, great big woman, who dark hair and always plays kind of the sensible type. She's a sensible type woman, and she's a real foil for Sid James.
You can really hear my French school coming through with that, right? Hattie Jacques. Like, there's this really popular thing in the States now. It's like flavored water, but it has no calories, and it's called La Croix. But it's not. They call it LaCroix. And I'm like, okay, I guess neither of those words make sense. We're both ignoring the X, but how do you get LaCroix out of that? Anyway, I thought it was La Croix, but I'm just painfully French. Barbara Windsor.
Can't place her.
Bernard Bresslaw.
No, can't place him.
And Peter Butterworth.
No.
Still, though, that's not bad. You knew like 3 of them.
Probably when I look at them, though, I'll say, oh, that guy. Oh,
Right,
yeah,
yeah,
that guy. Oh, that guy. But I just didn't know their names.
Yeah, of course. All right, so yeah, let's watch Carry On Camping, and we'll break halfway through for our midway break thoughts, and then finish it off afterward. Yeah, and the nice thing, too, about these is they all exist, because they were movies, and it's just a lot easier, I think, to keep track of movies that were on film in the first place. So none of these, as far as I know,
Well,
are
as
lost.
I say, get ready for some cornball, 'cause
Yeah.
here she comes.
Don't worry about that. Peter doesn't mind a drop of water. No, I love it. Oh, by the way, I'm Harry Potter, and this is my husband, Peter. How do you do? My name is Muggins, Charlie Muggins. That doesn't surprise me.
Just out of curiosity, did she say
Wait, I'm Harry Potter, and this is my husband.
Harry Potter? That's weird. I'm sure it's just a coincidence, but... Oh, Jesus.
This guy's having one hell of a time. Got the buckshot in his ass. Fire.
So yeah, I think that's like a good halfway point. Geez, yeah, that's actually like dangerous. Like that's the kind of thing they would just CG now, but he had to actually light his own butt on fire and go sit in some, like if that went wrong. So yeah, I think we're at the halfway point. Everything's converging. But yeah, I think what impresses me about, this type of movie or like Naked Gun, and they still try to make movies like this, but they're just not that good anymore. But it really is just the relentlessness of it. Like it doesn't actually need to be especially clever or especially funny. As long as it's just non-stop, you just have to laugh at it eventually. You just have to, And it really does impress me like how there's never a scene that just ends. You're waiting for something to happen, and then something always does happen. And I think that's like underrated, like how hard it is to write something with this many jokes.
Yeah, and the double meaning, everything, you really have to listen to it.
Yeah.
Because sometimes you know that you've missed it.
Yeah, there's definitely a couple I didn't
Yeah.
get. But then there's like the, okay, girls, 2 to a room, and the super big-breasted chick like, I don't seem to have a pair. Oh, well, I wouldn't say that. Like it's not all clever. But it's funny too, like I feel like there's like British society makes this kind of joke really work because you can have these like really hoity-toity guys like in just this very, very well. Like you can't really even have that character in North America because it'd be like, who is this guy?
Well, and they don't get hung up on a lot of stuff. Like the opening scene where they were in the movies, and here were all these people very strategically placed so that you never saw their front. You saw tits and ass, but you never saw private parts because they were all just placed just so, moving around. Nudity was just so, I mean, the women were very upset by it, but it was just, oh yeah, we're watching a bunch of nudes here.
Yeah.
And it was all just very casual. Same thing when you see a car stops and somebody just doesn't get out of a car. There's always some gorgeous looking girl walking down the street with either a very short little pair of shorties on or pants so tight that she could probably had to, pour herself into them. And just little innuendos all the time about sex.
And yeah, and it really does kind of build like a little world where either you're a henpecked man or a horn dog man or a sort of battle-axey woman or a super hot chick. And that's kind of it. That's the world.
Yeah, that's it. But there's never any there's quite a comfort level with producing that stuff. And you see that oftentimes in British movies where they don't seem to be hung up about that sort of thing. Whereas a lot of North Americans, oh my goodness, we can never show that. And they're serious about it. These guys say you can never show it, but they're laughing about it and they're joking about it while they're saying that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I know it's well-trod territory, but it is very true that, like, America in particular, what a bizarre version of being puritanical, where it's like, we can't talk about sex, we can't talk about nudity, but everyone's allowed to have a gun and please shoot someone. Like, I know that's a little unfair, but it kind of is how they are. So yeah, it's nice to see just other cultures that feel differently. I also kind of think it's interesting just that late 60s and 70s vibe of even like the nudist movie they're watching at the beginning. So that's the plot. It's just Sid James and his friend are dating these chicks who haven't managed to hook up yet. So he took them to this movie about a nudist camp, and he's like, we're going to take the birds to a nudist camp, and once everyone's nude, things will happen. But even that movie full of like nude people are kind of just like normal people, like relatively normal looking. Because like when I grew up, my era was like the Pam Anderson era, like if you're going to have a movie like this, it's the most super perfect plastic person, with the super breast job and everything is like a cartoon person. Where here it's just like, just some people, they're not bad looking, but they're not like amazing. They're just some naked people. So even that's kind of neat because that just sort of went away. And yeah, I do really like just the obnoxious Sid James joke where then he laughs, but just the stupid shit like the matronly old mother is like, I've got some grave misgivings about you, Sid James. He's just like, I should put some talcum powder on them. And then he like laughs at everyone, but nobody else laughs.
But we laugh because he's laughing.
Yeah, and everybody is really good at what they're supposed to do. Like his friend is just like, all right, so you're the tall dumb guy. Like, got it. And you're the, I can't quite tell if, like, the guy who runs the girls' camp, like, they haven't converged yet, but obviously it's all coming together. He's kind of got that sort of gay camp sort of thing going on, but he's also always making his double entendres are like, I'm at a girls' school and I keep saying inappropriate things about the girls. I don't know, he's, like, weird. He's on that line where I can't quite...
Yeah.
That's as close as this comes to a subtle character, I guess. Is that you can't for sure say if he's gay or not. But anyway, yeah, so there's the halfway. Let's, I guess, go grab something to eat. And this is our intermission. I'm going to put in the intermission music from the Holy Grail in here because it's very catchy intermission music. And then we'll be back.
That's not the only one.
I mean, it's definitely cartoony, right? I didn't expect that as the grand finale, is that the annoying old mom shows up at the campsite. I've been so worried about you, so they just release a goat or whatever and it chases her away. That's the end of the movie. So it's weird because I guess I guess the plot was just Sid James and his friend wanted to get laid, so at the end, finally, things have happened that their own girlfriends will finally have sex with them. It's an awful lot to go through. But what else I thought was funny is, because that's kind of the vague plot, but in a way, the only actual plot that happened was like 7 minutes before the movie ended, where next door, in the next field over, there's this big band that sets up and it's fucking shit up for everybody, and they have to arrange this elaborate like method where every character from all these disparate storylines comes together to help ruin this festival.
Get rid of that hippie party.
But it's just funny that happened, like, because I guess that's kind of like the we got to save the rec center, or we got to do whatever in these movies. But in this one, they waited till the bitter end. They're like, there's no plot to this movie. Like, real quick, let's just throw something in. But yeah, no, it was good. I would give that a big thumbs up because I was thinking back to, like comedy is one of those things that especially is kind of era defined, like what used to be funny isn't funny anymore. And especially once they got to, like all the characters are together in this campsite for the second half of the movie. So you've got all the hot girls from the girls' school are at the campsite with Dirty Sid James and his creepy ways, and there's the classic like hole in the shower so you can peek through. So that made me think back to all those like 80s movies, like Revenge of the Nerds, say. That's like, if you go back to it now, it's like a little funny, but it's not that funny. Like you'll be sitting there for like 20 minutes without laughing, easy. And then if you go back earlier than that, back to the 70s, is Animal House. Animal House is so famous and so not funny. I don't know that there's a single joke in that whole fucking movie. So I always just kind of thought like, yeah, maybe old comedy just isn't funny. But then you go back 10 more years to this, and we laughed a shit ton of times. Like, that's really funny.
Yeah. It's just so corny.
Yeah, but I mean, corny is better than not funny, So yeah, I got to give it a thumbs up. It's good.
Yeah, it was very, very enjoyable, and it had exactly what I was expecting it to have. It had all the sexy girls showing tits and ass.
Even that though, I'm surprised that opening scene where they're in the theater watching the movie about the nudist camp was so nudity filled, because really the rest of the movie they really were more careful to keep things covered.
Yeah, they really didn't have any nudity after that. They just had this suggestion of it. Lots of it.
Yeah, so this is a bit strange, but I guess it's a good way too to because I guess you kind of know. Well, that's what's interesting too, is like this era was just different. Because I watched a documentary once about just the history. It was that guy Ron Jeremy. He's a really famous porn actor. If you saw him, you'd probably know him. Everyone knows him. He's so famous. But his career goes back far enough that his early movies were like actual movies. There's like footage of him in like a World War I plane pretending to fly it, but it's a porn movie. Because before the VCR, like if you wanted to see tits on a screen, you had to go to the movie theater. So this is obviously not a porn movie, but even porn movies back then had to be movies. They had to have actual plots.
This is okay when they were talking about those postcards. Saucy.
Right.
Saucy is the best way you can explain this.
Yeah.
Saucy body jokes. They're not offensive. They're not dirty. In the mind that you think that sex might be dirty, it's not dirty. It's just good fun.
Right.
And you can show little, like the girls at the school going around with little shorties on, hardly anything on, losing their tops occasionally, but then covering up, and the knot hole in the wall where you obviously if you put your imagination, you'd be seeing quite a bit through that knot hole.
But even that stuff though, like the really short shorts and the top flying off, was all that the Babs chick, Barbara whoever. I mean, she's easily in her 30s. She's not like they're exploiting some young actress.
And it's all done in a sense of good fun. So you don't find it offensive at all. Yeah,
it really is. Those postcards come to life. Like that really was an accurate way to describe it. Because it's all really stereotypical characters. Or I was saying to you as we watched it that Sid James is somewhat like a real person. He's got a one-track mind, but he acts like a human. No one else does. Everyone else is like, here's your one joke, and you just do that. But yeah, and my favorite guy, I had to look him up just so I'd know. It turns out an easy way to tell which actor is which character is just their name. All of them, it's like their first name in real life is always their character's name. But Kenneth Williams, the guy who ran the girls' school, his overacting was so 100% of the time, he never didn't do it. And that made me like him a lot. I'm just like, now that's dedication to like, he always pulls a weird face and he always over delivers every line. And yeah, I respect that. That's good.
But we were saying how it's some of the sitcoms on TV, like, okay, Hancock's Half Hour, that if you watch them all, you would get to kind of connect with that character and accept him for what he is. Those Carry On movies, all those characters act that same way.
Right.
In all of those movies. So people would get so that they'd be looking forward to seeing another Carry On movie because you'd see those characters again.
Yeah, because the other guy, Charlie in this movie, but because he was the other skinny, knock-kneed British guy. But yeah, like there must be an established history of that guy's character because he doesn't, if you just take this movie by itself, he's just wandering into everyone else's life and just kind of fucking with their shit, and no one would ever put up with it, except that obviously he does that in every movie. That's probably the only downside, is that since that's on everybody's top 5 and was voted the #1 Carry On movie, I bet if we watched all of the top ones, they'd be good. But if you just decided you were going to sit down and watch all 30, I bet you'd have some rough days. I bet some of them are probably... But it is surprising, too, how... Because, I think the last big run of these was like Epic movie was the superhero one, and Date movie was the date one. And they just weren't funny. They just weren't good, but they still made a bunch of them. And, yeah, it's harder than it seems. I probably said this during the other break, but... Or another example is like the guys, that show Angel. There was an episode where Cordelia gets a job on a sitcom, so they had to make a fake sitcom for her to be on. And the writers said, like, man, we didn't realize how hard it is to write a sitcom. Because, like, every line, even if it's not funny, it has to be funny enough to justify a laugh track. Every fucking line. And, yeah, that's not easy. That's tough to do. And, yeah, this movie really didn't ever... like let the ball drop. No matter whether it was a good joke or bad, almost doesn't matter. Just every scene ended with something, just to keep it going.
And they all played off each other very well. They exaggerated. Some of the facial expressions that came out of that were just so exaggerated, but they fit. They worked.
Which is funny because that's the opposite of Leslie Nielsen, right? Like he's also super hilarious, but because he was a dramatic actor and he never cracked. He never showed a facial expression. So it's funny. It's like you go one way or the other and you're gold. You do some mealy middle thing, it's not going to work. Oh, the other thing, guys, that stood out to me, the one guy's plot that was actually kind of lame is the henpecked husband, where his resolution to his plot was that just one of the cute girls from the girls' school is just like, hey, everyone else is gone. You seem cool. Let's go fuck. And then once they do that, now he's assertive and he can take charge of his life. Which was pretty. That was
his wife.
Yeah, that was easily the lamest part of it. But even that, I feel like kind of what it made me think of, again, with like just different social mores in different cultures, is those like page 3 girls. Is that what it's called in England? Like in the newspaper, the page 3 girl is just a hot chick with no top on. It's just in the newspaper. Let me look that up because it's obviously not in the most fancy pants newspapers, but I'm sure I've heard of that as a thing. So it's probably more like your more rag newspaper. Page 3 was a British newspaper tradition of publishing a large image of a topless female glamour model on the 3rd page of mainstream red-top tabloids. The Sun introduced page 3 in 1970, which boosted its circulation considerably, leading to other tabloids imitating the feature.
I'd never heard of it.
3rd page. Yeah, and again, it's just one of those things that it seems so wild to us, living next door to the puritanical America, that could ever be a thing. But in England, it was just a thing.
Yeah, it's kind of, so they're kind of they don't seem to be real hung up about that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Or it's kind of like, too, if you've ever seen news in, like, Mexico, Mexican newscasters are the hottest women you'll ever see in your life. And yeah, because I guess it makes sense. It's like, I don't know, we want people to watch the news and this will help them watch the news. We just have something here in North America where we're like, couldn't do that.
Yeah. We've got the moral majority, that morality, puritanical upbringing, or whatever. Yeah, we have a real hang up about this kind of stuff, but they don't. They just seem to, and then they can put it out there and laugh at it, and and nobody's offended by it. Well, if they are offended by it, then they got a problem. But the majority of the world is not offended by this stuff.
Yeah, or it's like, well, I even feel like in North America, probably most people, when people complain or write in letters and, oh, I'm complaining, it probably still is a minority. It's just for whatever reason we listen. Where they're just like, no, thank you. It's you can have your
But they're famous for it because, Benny Hill is a perfect example of it.
Right.
Monty Python. Like, they're just full of this same kind of thing. Lighthearted, sex sells in it, and they use it to their benefit.
Yeah, whereas I guess like with us, it's like maybe that's why like Married with Children was such a revolution here, but that didn't happen till like the mid 80s before we finally had the balls to make a show where people will make a sex joke.
Yeah.
I mean, they kind of did, I guess, with like Mr. Roper and Three's Company, and like there'd always be, he'd think he'd overhear. What's that? I mean, they kind of had it. But
they were starting, but it wasn't this is real obvious stuff.
Yeah.
They just put this right out there, and you take it or leave it.
And then I guess, the other thing I would say to complement this is, since we've never watched a whole movie, that's at least twice as long, if not 3-4 times as long as the stuff we usually watch. So I was like, I hope this isn't just a long-ass day where I brought in something that's way too long, but that went by so fast. That was an easy watch. So... yeah, carry on. If you happen to be listening to this and you haven't seen them, as I had not, you should go watch them. Because, and like I was saying, like I've delved into a lot of the famous comedy movies of the past. And, it's surprising how often they're just not funny. So, you'd be better off with Carry On, I'd say.
And as I told you, when we were out taking our little break there, some of the early ones are really, really good. They're in black and white. Carry On Nurse, Carry On Doctor, Carry On... oh, I don't even remember the names of them.
The other one that a lot of people brought up, it is later when they had color, but Carry On the Khyber Pass, or Up the Khyber Pass, that's like a Cleopatra one. Apparently that one's really good too. That's the other like critical top list. So I never did come up with a good way to wrap these up. We don't have like a snappy sign-off or anything, snappy sign-off phrase. Although neither did they. Like... let's just chase off the old lady with a goat, and then everyone goes into their tents to have sex at the end.